This is a production of Cornell University.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Sheila Grant and I work in the College of Arts and Sciences. It is my privilege to welcome you to today's lecture by Professors Feldshuh and Stucky, entitled Training Creativity and the Imagination. David Feldshuh is the Artistic Director of Cornell Center for the Theater Arts and the Albert C. and Molly Phelps Bean Faculty Fellow in Theater Arts. He is a graduate of Dartmouth College and trained at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. A McKnight Fellowship took him to the Guthrie Theater in Minneapolis, first as an actor and then as an associate director. While at Guthrie, he earned a PhD in theater from the University of Minnesota and completed an MD in 1979. He is a board-certified emergency room physician and a fellow of the American College of Emergency Physicians. Professor Feldshuh lectures frequently on the subject of human experimentation and the use of theater in exploring important social issues. His play, Miss Evers' Boys, has been produced throughout the U.S., received the New American Playwright Award, and was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize and won seven Emmy Awards as an HBO movie. Stephen Stucky is the Given Foundation Professor of Music and is widely recognized as one of the leading American composers of his generation. In addition to composing, Mr. Stucky is active as a conductor, a writer, lecturer, and teacher. He studied at Baylor and Cornell and has been on the faculty at Cornell since 1980. Major American orchestras have commissioned works from Professor Stucky that have been performed across the United States and Europe, and for institutions such as Carnegie Hall, the Aspen Festival, Eastman School of Music, and the BBC. He has served on the boards of the Society for New Music, the MacDowell Colony, the New York Foundation for the Arts, the Barlow Endowment for Music Composition, and the Cayuga Chamber Orchestra. He was elected as a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters and won the Pulitzer Prize for Music for his second concerto for orchestra in 2005. At this point, I would like to remind you to silence your cell phones and pagers, and please help me in giving Professors Feldshuh and Stucky a warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm looking forward to hearing your comments as well as, of course, as the comments of Professor Stucky. Let me start with one of my favorite short plays. It goes like this. Once there was a centipede. Nightly she would dance an amazing dance that all the animals in the forest would come and watch. One evening the frog said, "How on earth do you know which foot to put down when?" And the centipede never danced again. Well, creativity, like a shadow, seems to disappear when you shine the light of analysis on it. When I went to drama school at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Arts, one thing that was said to me again and again was, don't talk about it, just do it. That's sage advice, but over the years I've found that not talking about it can lead as often to ignorance as to inspiration. So at the risk of making everything disappear, today Steve and I are going to talk about it, the it being creativity and the imagination. So I'd like to start with this story of myself in drama school. It was a year really of despair. I had gone to an alternate Ivy League institution, not Cornell. I was a philosophy major. I was steeped in the ability to analyze virtually anything, to write papers about it, and figured that I could do that and carry that on when I was in drama school. Well, for a year I tried that, and by the end of 1 year, I was in, as I said, artistic despair. I got worse and worse as an actor. And then I took a course with a man named Jacques Lecoq. Monsieur Lecoq was he's deceased now, was a very famous and remarkable mime teacher, and he had a school in Paris. And in this summer session, which was 6 hours a day for the whole summer, I brought my despair to these occasions, And one day he proposed that the students do an exercise. It was a tricky exercise. It had to do with the Italian Commedia dell'arte. And you'd put on a mask. He set this out, the scenario. You put on a mask. This character would go out there, pretend he was a soldier, a Brighella character. He'd strut around. Then another character named Arlecchino, the clown, would make some noises. And this Brighella character would get more and more frightened by gradations until finally this character would run off stage. What was tricky about it is that you had to hear in 5 different ways. First, the sound of this Harlequin character made an effect on you. Then you had the sound, you listened to it, and then you didn't pay any attention to it. Then you heard the sound, you listened to it, you didn't pay any attention, you checked it out again, etc., etc. So there's 5 different ways of hearing. So I figured life couldn't get any worse, so I raised my hand, I got up there, I put on the mask, and perhaps you can guess what happened next. The next thing I remember, everybody except for Monsieur Lecoq, who never stood for anybody, was standing and applauding. Now, I, of course, was very happy, but at the same time, I was perplexed. And my teacher said, he was not a kind of Cornell teacher. He was not particularly nurturing. He just looked at me with those eyes and he said, "Ce n'est pas mal," not bad. That was his highest level of compliment. Well, I thought that I had experienced a different way of functioning. And as well as a certain degree of happiness, I was also perplexed. And I was quickly reminded of the story of Laurence Olivier, the famous actor who came off stage. And one person said to him, "Larry, you were wonderful tonight." And Olivier said, "Yes, I know," very angry. The man said, "Well, you were absolutely brilliant." And Olivier said, "Yes, I said I know." "But Larry, this was a world-shaking performance." And Olivier said, "Yes, of course I know, but I can't remember how I did it." Well, that's the thing. Couldn't remember how I did it. It was something beyond anything I could think up, anything I could write an essay about. It was preceded by this despair, but perhaps a better way of thinking about it was by surrender. I got up there and I really didn't care anymore if it were a good or bad performance. It was accompanied by a feeling that was completely satisfying. The experience itself was without self-consciousness. It was effortless. It gave me a sense of surprise, and it just felt right. Well, that motivated me to look into the whole question of creativity and what it was. And what I'd like to posit with you today, for those of you who have traveled to London, you know when you travel on the Underground, they have all these signs. Mind the gap. Well, that's the area in my mind of creativity. You have actors in rehearsal for weeks upon weeks upon weeks, drilling and memorizing all these lines. But there is a moment when they have to surrender all this practice and give themselves, release themselves into performance. And to my mind, drama schools today are very good at training the craft. But there's also another element, which is the ability to integrate that craft into performance, to let go of all this learning and allow this learning to come through you. So the question about creativity then focuses on how do you learn how to forget rehearsal and be fully available to the moment of performance. T.S. Eliot said, "Between the thought and the action lies the shadow." So what I'm interested in looking at creativity is that shadow and how that shadow stands in the way of full performance. Metaphorically, it's compared to lighting a match. You want to light the match, and there's the spark. Or, for those of you who are kind of half asleep, don't get startled, you clap your hands, and out comes the sound. That's the idea of this performance that is immediately generated without any level of self-consciousness. A psychologist described this creative act like this. It's the period for the writer when the characters take over, when the melodies flow without forcing, when the painting seems to paint itself. The artist is totally absorbed in the work. This total concentration is a particular form of consciousness, and it's not just in the arts, but also in the sciences. The ability, a new quote, "the ability to regard old questions in new ways from new angles," Einstein called it. And Darwin said, "I can remember the very spot in the road whilst in my carriage when to my joy the solution came to me." So what is creativity? Excuse me, I think it's a form of behavior. And I think we can train that behavior. What we have to do is train the mind and the body. We also have to adapt the environment, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, and I know Steve will deal with that as well. So what we want is the ability to take familiar possibilities and push and pull them into new patterns. So how do we get there? There are certain fundamental premises. One of the saddest things that ever happened to me at Cornell was when a student came in to me and said, you know, I'm just not creative. I just don't have an imagination. I simply don't think that is true. A basic premise for me in teaching creativity is that we all have some level of imagination and talent. Some of us stand in our own ways more effectively than others. Therefore, training in creativity is getting rid of these blocks. We seem to have it as children. I remember when my son Noah was a small child, he loved to go to the car wash and he'd see these brushes cleaning the car, and my wife, who had long hair at the time, would play with him, and her hair one day streamed down onto his face, and he looked up at my wife and he said, "Car wash." We were doing this play, Midsummer Night's Dream. We took it to the local elementary school, and in one of the scenes, one of the characters used a toilet cleaning device to stab himself as if it were a sword, and one of the youngsters wrote to us and said, my favorite part of the play was when the character of Bottom plunged himself to death. I mean, these are connections. I mean, they're wonderful, and in a way, we laugh because they're so right. And that's the ability for youngsters, for children to make connections and to see relationships. And that's part of creativity that for some reason we seem to lose as we get older. Part of the problem, I think, is that our notion that science is clear and can be taught, but that the arts require talent and imagination. I believe that the arts and creativity per se can be taught. So let me talk about the two ways that I approach this. The first, as I said, is clearing self-consciousness out of the body. The second is out of the mind. Well, what is self-consciousness in the body? Self-consciousness in the body manifests itself in acting as mannerisms. So what is a mannerism? A mannerism is when you do the same thing with your body no matter what you're doing. For example, I once knew an actor, when he got angry, he'd make his right leg stiff. So he'd say, "Now is the winter of our discontent." That's okay, that's Richard III. But if you're going to do Henry V, "Once more unto the breach, dear friends," it's not a good thing. Now, why do you have that mannerism? Well, the answer is it's an island of security. It's something that tells you you still exist as a performer because you're out there in that void. So the first thing we do is train the body to rid it of mannerisms, to give yourself that sense of security even without that. Well, how do you do that? One thing is you get the body to do things that the body never did before. If an actor is not comfortable with doing this, with reaching out, you do exercises like that. Actually, you do exercises for the whole body so you're comfortable in all kinds of ways. A similar thing would be, if you listen to my voice, if we had some sort of oscilloscope here, it probably takes up 2 or 3 notes. But if I talk like this, it kind of feels unfamiliar. So you get people to talk in ways that they don't feel comfortable talking that way, so they get familiar with different elements in their voice. These kinds of things allow people to get have a wider spectrum and be less self-conscious about using that spectrum. We try to make the unfamiliar familiar in the body. Now, what about the mind? A lot of acting work has to do with the ability to be here now for what's supposed to happen in the script. And there's all kinds of what's called action rehearsals where you respond to what's actually there. So the question is, what stops us from being actually there, from really responding? Well, there's a simple exercise that we do, among many others, where we take an object, and let's pretend I'm bouncing a ball. And then I give that to Steve over here, and I say, well, Steve, well, you take this movement and change it into something else, and there's a big circle. So then Steve does this, and he changes it into this. He changes it like this. All of a sudden it becomes 2 hands, and then, of course, being Steve, it becomes conducting. So what you do is you go around this circle, and then I ask the student something very simple. Did you think of what you were going to do before the gesture came to you? And frequently they will say, yeah, I thought I could do this. So I'm bouncing the ball, and when it comes to them, they go shooting a rifle. You know, it has nothing to do with the gesture itself. The idea is that you don't think of anything a priori before it comes to you. You let the gesture teach you. You let the gesture change through you. You don't change the gesture. I don't know if I'm making any sense when I say that, but that is the key. One student said to me something that captures for me the heart of this kind of teaching, which is this. He said, I didn't realize that if I would wait, the answer would come to me. That is the heart of creativity. It's somehow you engage the body and you engage the mind in order to allow the creative impulse to come through you. Well, there's various other elements that might be hindrances to creativity, including the environment. I was very interested to see that the new life sciences building has labs that connect with each other. I think that's wonderful because you do get tangential thinking that allows you to rub up against new ideas. But there's other kinds of things in an environment that I believe restrain creativity. One is expectations and demands. So Steve can talk about the McDowell colony, but I suspect that a lot of places where you go to work, they don't say you have to have this by this day or this by this day. They might not. There's a paradox also about creativity, which is frequently you need freedom within form. Obviously, you need that as an actor. You have a script, but you have to be free within that script. James McConkey, the writer, Cornellian, you may know his work. He once told a story about coming up and being in Pennsylvania, and he saw this sign which captures this paradox. The sign said, "Freedom, Pennsylvania, building permits required." So that's the thing about creativity with form, in form. Somehow you have to be able to free yourself, have spontaneity within form. I think standardization does not allow room for the unexpected. I was pleased to see in a recent brochure from the Arts and Sciences School that 50% of our classes have 1 to 10 students in them. I think that's a very good sign because you need that degree of freedom and flexibility to allow new things to happen. It's interesting to ask, do grades promote or hinder creativity? At a time when you're trying to avoid self-judgment. Self-judgment early on in the creative process is like putting a plant in the ground and every 2 days yanking it out of the ground to see if it's growing or not. What you have to do is have a point where you do obviously green light thinking and allow these things to nurture themselves. It's interesting that a place like Colorado College has a block system. You may know about this. They teach one course for 3.5 weeks. And I've taught there a couple of times. That's an interesting thought. Should all Cornell students have a chance at some point in their career to take one course and one course only and immerse themselves into it? Because immersion is one of the key elements of creativity. Another exercise or another element is, I don't know if you can see my high-tech graph, but I'll quickly. This was created by an expert at MIT. And here, it's a graph with a 45-degree angle line here. This says challenge, and this says skill. Now, if you have a lot of challenge and little skill, you're not going to get creativity. You're going to get terror. Help, this word says. If you have a lot of skill and a little challenge, you're going to get snoring, right? You're going to be bored. Somewhere in the middle, those are the kind of exercises I try to create to foster creativity in the students taking classes. So for example, by engaging their whole body, let's say we do a speech from Macbeth. Is this a dagger I see before me? I'll get them to pantomime this speech. This is supposed to be a question mark. Is this a dagger I see before me? So let's say they do that on their own speech. Then, once they have that perfectly, I'll raise a sign and say, sad. Then they'll look somewhere else. Happy, uncertain, seductive. So each time they see a sign, they have to immediately respond to that sign and do the speech again. And what's the purpose of this exercise? They have enough skill to meet that challenge, but they cannot think their way through it. It's faster than their mind can function. And then all of a sudden you see somebody blossom and come to life. It's really a remarkable experience. Creativity is in many ways like courtship. It requires discipline, observation for nuance, and gullibility. And here's one of my favorite elements about teaching it. Gullibility is a willingness to explore possibilities without any assurance of success. And I'm sure that many people in this room to arrive where you are today, have explored possibilities without any assurance of success. I think that's an important lesson. My time is almost up, so let me just say that it is my hope that every Cornell student, and many already have, but I would like to extend this to every Cornell student so that they can get the sense that they have hidden resources, that there's an opportunity to understand their own imagination and how it works, that there's other kinds of learning, other channels, intuitive learning, that the environment can contribute to that, that as Frank Capra said, a hunch is creativity trying to tell us something. We can teach students to learn to listen. They can gain that surprise and that feeling of, I did that, or perhaps more accurately, turning to me in class and saying, how did I do that? Where did that come from? Arnold Toynbee said, to give a fair chance to potential creativity is a matter of life and death for any society. I think we need imagination now more than ever. Let me end by my favorite joke, which captures the different kind of education that I've come to really enjoy myself and enjoy teaching. The small child comes to the father and asks, why is the sky blue? And the father says, I don't know. Where does the wind come from? And the father says, I don't know. Why is the sun warm? And the father says, I'm sorry, I don't know. The child, somewhat taken aback, says, I hope you don't mind me asking you all these questions. And the father says, of course not. How else are you going to learn? Thank you.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure for me to share this space with my friend David Feldshuh and to be so inspired so early on a Saturday morning. and to find that without any pre-planning, I agree with everything you say, and truly I'm inspired by it. I have a slightly different way of expressing my notions about whether you can teach creativity, because I often say you can't actually teach it, although apparently you can. But you can help young adults restore it, because I think we all have it as children. We all have this willingness to live in the imagination, to believe in fantasy, to make improbable leaps and unexpected connections. And then it is, by and large, socialized out of us by the educational system and by our parents and by our friends. And so the challenge, I think, is to somehow make that accessible again to people this age. I'm a believer, not so much by science, but by faith, in the theory of Howard Gardner, a psychologist from an alternate Ivy League institution, called the theory of multiple intelligences. This has been around for about a quarter century. But Gardner's idea is that in addition to verbal linguistic intelligence and logical mathematical intelligence, by the way, the only two kinds that are privileged by the educational system, and that is by and large even true at an enlightened place like Cornell, in addition to those are musical intelligence and kinesthetic bodily intelligence and spatial intelligence and so on. I think the agenda of defending these additional 6, he's got 8 altogether. So in addition to verbal and mathematical, these additional 6 intelligences has become so urgent to me because of an experience in my own life. My younger son, Matt, who is now a professional actor in New York, was declared a failure by himself and by the educational system at the ages of 8, 9, 10. And his life was saved by art, specifically by Shakespeare. When he was in middle school, the mother of one of his classmates wrote a grant proposal to start a Shakespeare program for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and he sort of accidentally auditioned. In fact, I think what happened was it was a different Matt who auditioned, and they got the last name wrong when they posted the cast list, so he showed up, and it saved his life. And I've thought about that incident ever since, because it tells me about the power of the committed individual, this mother, to change the world in a small but really meaningful way in the life of our family, and about the power of art to change lives, which it certainly did in the case of my son Matt. Of course, all the disciplines involve creativity. This flash of insight that allows you to find a solution in math or science is no less crucial in those fields than the flash of insight that leads to a solution in the arts. As a composer, I'm working mostly with large institutions with symphony orchestras and so on, and so it means that a lot of my work is off campus and invisible to the local community. And so it makes my work here, in one sense, a little more difficult. But in another sense, it enables me, I think, to enrich what I'm able to offer to my students, because I bring back that knowledge and those experiences to share with them here. And for me, that's a very important transaction. I hope for them too. I want to do that with you today a little bit. I want to share a little bit about a process I just went through, because I was facing despair and blockage and so on, and in a way that has been very inspiring for me, I was helped to get through that. I want to show you a little bit of that. I got a call from the Dallas Symphony Orchestra about 2 years ago, offering me a very large commission. I mean, very, very large in scope and with a good price tag and so on. Sort of thing that you sort of can't turn down, except that my brief was to write a large piece for chorus and soloists and orchestra marking the centennial of the birth of Lyndon Johnson. Now, I could see many paths to disaster, and I couldn't see any path to success in this assignment. So I nevertheless accepted the offer for two reasons. I think one is that anything that seems impossible I say yes to, because I figure it will be character building in some way. And because my agent had been working on getting this commission for several months, and I was embarrassed to tell her that I didn't want it after she had this great success. So I was 13 in 1963 when Johnson became president. I was 18 in 1968 when the assassinations happened and when Johnson announced that he was not running for re-election during the height of the Vietnam War. I have profoundly mixed and complicated feelings about those days. I was the age when that stuff went straight in, and during this process, I've had to sort of confront those emotions and those memories, and reevaluate my attitude to all of that stuff. What made it possible for me to do this, what saved me, I think, was that I was put together in a kind of shotgun marriage with a librettist from New York City called Gene Shear, who's done a number of operas at the Metropolitan and Houston Grand Opera and other places. And that he was able to lead me through this process in such a way that it made clear to me finally that I could do this. I'm going to show you in a moment some of the words that he came up with. But first, in order to kind of set the scene, I would like to show you what's in effect a trailer, a kind of promotional video about this project, just to get us back into the historical, let's see, I have to deal with my technology phobia just for a moment here. Get us back into this historical framework.
It is my duty to the American people to report that renewed hostile actions against United States ships on the high seas and the Gulf of Tonkin have today required me to order the military forces of the United States to take action in reply.
We started with simply the assignment to do something about President Johnson. This was the vision of the Dallas Symphony, that to mark the occasion of the centenary, which is actually August of 2008.
On August 4th, 1964, two major events in LBJ's presidency collided. There was the Gulf of Tonkin and the discovery of Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman's bodies, these three civil rights workers who had been missing all summer.
It's a kind of iconic moment in the development of America, and you can summarize the big events of that year on a single day, August 4th, 1964.
LBJ received word around 8 o'clock at night that the three bodies of these three civil rights workers, Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman, have been discovered.
These three young men, Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, both from New York City, and James Cheney, who was from Mississippi itself, had joined CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, and worked for them for the summer. And they were registering black voters in Mississippi.
Yeah, but on June 21st, Schwerner, Cheney, and Goodman went to look at a church that had been burned. They were taken by the cops into a local jail. They were released about 5 hours later. The police were in cahoots with members of the KKK, and they were ultimately murdered that night.
August 4th, 1964. I was at a meeting at a church, and they got a call. My mother told them to bring me home, and everybody in the house was crying. The television was on. You could see this picture on the screen. 3 bodies being put into a hearse.
At 8 o'clock at night, when LBJ is called by Hoover's assistant and told that the bodies have been discovered, he's asked whether they should go public with that information. And LBJ really responds as a sort of a kind human being and says, no, we can't do that. We have to notify the families first.
On August 4th, I was home. This was 44 days after my brother and James Cheney were first missing. And we got a call from Lyndon Johnson. He was on the phone. He said, this is the President of the United States. Who are you? And he said, I have some really bad news for you. And, we found the bodies of your brother, James Cheney, Martin Schwerner, and we want you to know before we say anything publicly.
On the same day, early in the morning, LBJ got a call that the Maddox and the Turner Joy were under threat of being attacked.
Secretary McNamara, Lano.
President, we just had word by telephone from Admiral Sharp that the destroyer is under torpedo attack. Now, where are these torpedoes coming from? Well, we don't know. Presumably from these unidentified craft that I mentioned to you a moment ago.
Robert McNamara was the Secretary of Defense in the Johnson administration, and he was, if not the architect of the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, certainly its CEO.
During the course of the day, you hear in these phone conversations McNamara and LBJ struggling, wrestling with what to do in response to this attack that they assumed had taken place.
They misinterpreted this as an attack, which in fact had not happened. And we can only speculate how history might have developed otherwise if that interpretation had been better.
At 11:32 that night, LBJ went on TV and told the nation that an attack was underway.
Undoubtedly, the fact that 2 of the missing men were white and were from New York City, so that their hometown paper was the New York Times, made it into a bigger national story than it might have been.
The president used that to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Vietnam sort of eclipsed a lot of the good he did with the Great Society and with civil rights.
It's just an amazing story, and it got lost in the sauce. It's a Shakespearean tragedy.
And the fact that it happened at the same time that another national tragedy was unfolding, the ramping up of the Vietnam War into something that was going to turn out quite a complicated and bad way, makes that a kind of iconic day, focusing so many feelings and ideas and issues that we all lived with in the 60s and that we're still living with the consequences of. Ultimately, we developed a piece that's over an hour long, but there's a crucial moment. I think I can show this to you. There was a crucial moment early in the process when Gene brought me a mock-up of the first scene, of the first number, and I got goosebumps and I realized that I could do this after all. And it was this moment when he has put together Mrs. Cheney, the mother of James Cheney, Mrs. Goodman, a Cornell alum, by the way, mother of Andrew Goodman, mourning the deaths of their sons. It was the saddest moment of my life, the day they found my son's body. I don't know if it eases the pain, but I do think he did something worthwhile. With, simultaneously, McNamara and Johnson beginning to plan the escalation of the war on the same day. And then with this true story that Mrs. Goodman told the New York Times: when my son was killed, I put these lines on the wall of my apartment, and then this poem of Stephen Spender. I think continually of those who were truly great. And I saw in this conjunction, this is leaping the gap. This is Gene Shear leaping the gap and showing me how I could do it also. To bring together these disparate elements, which I think is kind of the essence of creativity. It's making unlikely connections. And so suddenly I knew I could do this thing, and I became invested in it, and it became a very inspiring and edifying experience for me, not just writing the piece, but dealing with these ideas and confronting this part of my own history, of our own history, in a way that bringing together these topics, the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War, somehow simultaneously shows us the greatness and the failure of Mr. Johnson, but also the greatness and the failures of this country. I think we have time. I'll play you a little bit of how this first scene turned out. This is from the first performances last month in Dallas, September in Dallas. Soprano Laquita Mitchell is Mrs. Cheney. Mezzo-soprano Kelly O'Connor is Mrs. Goodman. And the tenor, Vale Rideout, is McNamara. Johnson doesn't appear until the second number, so you won't get to meet him this morning. Now, it must be this. I realize we should have Since there are no jokes in this piece, we should have put this first and put you last, I think, so we don't end on such a gloomy note. But thank you very much. And we have a little time to chat among us if, yes, please.
Comment really for David. David talked very well about how after all this preparation, we just stop thinking and act. And I wonder if professional athletes, at a certain point, when they get in the zone, do the same thing.
Yes, it's interesting. When I first both experienced this 155 years ago, and it was before books like The Inner Game of Tennis, the phrase "in the zone." And yes, it's exactly the same thing. I remember teaching at Colorado College, actually, and one of the basketball players, I was teaching him how to use his breath to focus and let go of everything. And I went to see one of the games, and there he was at the foul line. And what does he do? Puts down the ball, does this, picks up the ball, and shoots his foul shot. Luckily, he made it. I felt good about that. And very briefly, I was speaking to an uncle and a daughter who was visiting Cornell, and they were very interested in football. And I was talking about some of these things because the daughter was interested in theater and about response time and the shadow. And he kept asking me things about football. And he said, boy, I think a defensive line could really respond this way and get up. And I said, boy, you're really interested in football. What makes you interested in Cornell football so much? He says, actually, it's not Cornell football, it's the Jets. It was the owner of the Jets who was up here. Mr. Johnson. So, yeah, it's a total athletic thing, and I've actually spoken to the football team in the years past about these kind of things.
May I ask you what happened in your life that took you from being the director of a theater company in Milwaukee to becoming a physician?
Well, yes, you may ask. Yes, I shall. So I was pre-med in college. I'll make it a really quick answer without any censorship. I was pre-med in college. I got a fellowship to go to Lambda. Then I got another fellowship to join the Guthrie Theater through the University of Minnesota. I was very successful at a very young age. At 27, I was an associate director of the Guthrie Theater, and I wasn't happy. I know it was a 60s kind of thing, but that's the way it was. And so I decided to go off and explore some things because I got a call from the University of Minnesota saying I had done all these courses, and if I didn't write a PhD dissertation, they were going to take away all these courses. So I thought, all right, I'll go around and look at creativity. So I went to the Esalen Institute, spent 3 months there. I went to the Zen monastery, spent 3 months there. I'd done Aikido, karate, Rolfing, Alexander technique, all these different psychophysical things of the 60s and 70s, Est, you may know that. So I wrote about this, about creativity and actor training. And then I decided, I think I'll become a psychiatrist. And so I applied to medical school, and then I realized that my theater work was sufficiently psychotherapeutic, so I decided to go into emergency medicine, and I still practice on a part-time basis. That's it, in a nutshell.
First of all, congratulations on the piece.
Oh, thank you.
I kept looking for a little thing here in front of my chair, seeing the little lyrics translated into Italian, which you normally see at the opera, so it's magnificent.
Not sure what the Italians would make of this.
Creativity isn't just, I think, a big thing, but also in everyday life. And I wonder if there's as you both examined it, both the magic of being able to compose music, the magic of get somebody to do a performance, but also the magic of sort of being at work, thinking of something. Is there a role that adds discipline to creativity, such as time pressure, deadline? Is there a line between creativity and just sort of wasting time because you think you're being creative? How do you balance that out?
Those are excellent questions. First of all, about deadlines. I usually start a piece about 2 weeks after it would be impossible to finish it on time. And in this case, I had to wait actually for the libretto to be developed, but also I had to wait for myself to give myself permission to just let go and do my best. The pressure to be good, you know, is pernicious, and I can never start a piece until I give myself permission to write a mediocre piece, and then just try to make it a little better, you know. We're in a funny situation in academia because we do these activities which require not thinking, and which require putting yourself in a zone where the work from day to day goes forward in ways that you can't plan and that you can't explain. And then we show up at work and explain it, because our job is talking about these things in part. I mean, it's what we're doing today. So the technique is very important, and what I do with my students is mostly about technique, because they can't get in that zone without technique. But I found in the case of this piece, it was about a 9-month project, and that I had to get so fully invested in it, and so the machinery had to get so warmed up, so well warmed up, that every day I didn't have to somehow restart the process. I just sat down and let something happen.
The only thing I would say about that, it's a huge question, but when I do my playwriting, I always leave the previous night. I'm just on the brink of writing something, that's where I'll stop, so that the next morning I'm already lubricated to start the next day. Both Steve and I think anxiety and even maybe a little fear, but certainly discipline, are absolutely necessary. I'm not in any way saying that you can just, quote unquote, be creative. I think there's a craft that's involved. It's a question of seeing students who have that craft and then aren't performing up to the level of that craft that they've spent all that time mastering.
I don't know anything about your field, Professor Feldshuh, but I was reminded in your anecdote about sort of falling back on your subconscious to make these decisions that then are expressed in some form of expert performance. There's a field of psychology called Naturalistic Decision-Making that says very similar things. The idea of that particular little niche in psychology is to see how experts are actually making decisions in a dynamic environment, such as firefighters, and trying to debrief what they did. And they all express the same kind of ideas or experiences that you just told us about in your own field. Largely, they don't even think that they're making decisions. They're just going with the flow. And it's the kind of thing that happens with expertise. So you should realize that you were there, it seems to me, based upon this other line of thought. And you might, the fellow who started that field, his name is Gary Klein, and you find that it has some kind of general application to these things. So
thank you. Very briefly, I do speak to my students about decision-making. This is tangential to what you say. And essentially, people are worried about going to medical school, going to law school. I say, well, how am I going to make this decision, they ask. And I say, what you want to do is pose the question and then watch what you do. Let me try to make that a little more specific. When I wasn't sure whether I wanted to go to medical school, I applied this. And I said, I really don't know if I want to go to medical school, but I'll go back to Columbia and take a couple of classes because I'll need those for medical school in case I want to go. But I'm not sure really if I want to go. And I'll fast forward. Then I apply. I got some brochures from various medical schools. Then I applied to 23 medical schools. By that time, I realized I wanted to go to medical school just by watching what I did. And it kind of relieves you of the worry, because in certain ways, frequently, I'm telling students, you've made the decision, you just haven't accepted that you've made it yet.
David?
Yeah.
The phrase, the second order change. Have you heard of it? It's
no,
a book. It's an idea that comes to somebody who wants to do something but doesn't know how to do it quite. And he knows if he goes directly to it, it'll be blocked. So he can't go directly to you.
I got you.
To get to you, I've got to go to him. And through him, I'll get to you. That's called a second order change, because instead of going this way, I've gone this way. And I think there was during the missile crisis in Cuba, the generals advised Kennedy that we have to bomb those sites because the Cubans are going to aim those missiles at us. And Russia said that if they're bombed, then that's deemed an attack on us, and you're going to pay the price for it. So the question was, how do we get rid of those missiles without starting another world war? Somebody in the cabinet said, look, there's the Monroe Doctrine. We have the right to see who comes into the Western Hemisphere on ships. We have the right to search them. And what we're going to do is we're going to stop the Russian ships that are delivering the stuff to Cuba. Then they can't put these missiles together. So Russia raised a big fuss, said they can't wear in international waters and so forth. And I think Khrushchev was in there and he was pounding away. And that's the way the Cuban Missile Crisis passed, without bombing them directly, but preventing the materials from getting there. That sounds like an easy idea. I mean, why didn't somebody think of that before? But I guess the process of talking about it and fearing it and imagining the consequences led to this idea of saying, wait, let's stop them from arming by doing this. That would be a prime example of a second order change. Also, sometimes we sit down and we have, we have a great idea. We thought about this before. Last week we talked about it, but maybe we want to do it a different way. I mean, that would be another example of a second order change. And what you're talking about seems to me to be close to that, where you just let it come into you. And, and then you say, you know what, I'm going to let myself go. And you didn't think of that first, but it came to you later. So, I mean, there's a book called Second Order Change. I highly recommend it because it's so effective in everyday life that we're unaware of that we're doing it.
Thank you. In the back here, please.
I want to address the use of the word gullibility. Could you expand on that?
A willingness not to reject things even though we don't know everything about them. Or if you could put it in a positive way, a willingness to go with hunches.
I have the experience in my work often that an idea will come to me which I wasn't planning to have, which doesn't fit the plans for the piece I'm working on, and which I'm suspicious of because I didn't work hard enough for it, and because it's maybe too simple or somehow too obvious. And I always think at those moments, I can't leave this in the piece, my friends will laugh at me. And I've learned to trust myself, or trust that reptile brain that probably put that there instead of the frontal cortex. And leave those things in because they often turn out to be the best things in the piece. Yes?
Question for you on the orchestration. I am assuming you did the orchestration?
Oh, sure.
How did the wailing trumpet I could hear and sort of anticipate, how did you decide what instrumentation to use thereafter beyond?
I don't know. But I've been doing it a long time, so it sort of comes naturally.
Do you all believe in the left brain, right brain thing? Because what you're saying, discipline is a left brain function, and not knowing how you did it is a right brain function, it seems to me.
Well, I'm right-brained enough that I can't even remember which half is which, so I guess I have to believe in it.
Yeah, I think the research that they're doing, I wish that I could get involved in it just with PET scans and, we'll hook Steve Stucky up there and he thinks of the trumpet and we see what part of his brain lights up. I would personally find that very interesting. And I think more and more of that is going to be done, and I suspect they're going to find, in spite of the right brain, left brain, they're going to find multifactorial centers that are dealing with some of the same things. There's this article in the New York Times talking about, quoting, why don't you read this one? Sing, brain, sing. I looked that up, Sing, Brain, Sing. It's a fun article which kind of deals with some of these things.
I think to keep everybody on schedule, we have time for one more question.
I'm just wondering how your work was received by the folks who hired you to do it.
Very well. One of the things I mean, among the many reasons that I was afraid of this project was that I was afraid of going down to Dallas and saying the wrong thing, you know. The orchestra was, there were no strings attached. There was there were no preconditions, as John McCain would say. And they embraced this, the city and the audience and the orchestra embraced the project really in a heartwarming way, I thought. So.
Let me just say one quick thing before we stop. All of you obviously are deeply interested in Cornell and advisors to Cornell. My feeling is that not everybody can be Steve Stuckey, but I do feel that every student, again, should have the chance to experience, hey, I have an imagination. I have a different way of functioning. And I'd like to, many students can because they're in various courses where they do that. Some of them are arts courses, some aren't. But that's the kind of thing I would like to see evolve maybe after my time. Because, you know, just keep moving in that direction because it opens a whole new sense of being alive to students.